Welcome to an audiobook entitled Parish Management and Operations, The Buck Stops Here, narrated by Catholic author Michael Brinda. We hope you enjoy the segment and find it useful in your ministerial work.
Chapter 25, Exposing the Grand Illusion. In terms of an approach methodology to confronting a broken culture, it comes down to one primary advisement. Weak and timid is not advised when wearing your PMO administrator hat, as in, all your weak and timid administrator efforts will amount to nothing more than singing Kumbaya around the campfire. Be true to yourself, your own temperament? Absolutely. Never try to be somebody else. Follow your own interpersonal communication style? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, you must address all issues that have corrupted the culture in a clear and precise manner. Whatever personal management style you choose to use, you must kill the old culture and install the new culture, and you must do so immediately. Simply stated, you must attain results. However, do not misread here. This is not to say in any way loud and aggressive is the approach to take. Be advised, it is not. Be yourself. Use your God-given talents. But face these inevitable issues in advance. How will you handle individual confrontational pushback to your request for changes? Because you will face pushback. How will you handle individual oblique or not so oblique pushback to your request? How will you handle what is best labeled as collective rejection, also known as mutiny, to your request? How will you handle those who agree to your face, then simply ignore your request? You don't think any of these options are possibilities? That would be a mistake. One or most likely all of these situations are guaranteed when you begin to kill the current culture and install a new culture. Failure to recognize the above circumstances leads to the regrettable condition whereby the administrator and those they manage misunderstand or defy your definition of common PMO job performance measurement yardsticks. And your definition is now the only definition that matters in this context. In the past and prior to your arrival, descriptive workplace terminology for measuring and subsequently discussing job performance with employees and volunteers, such as accuracy, effective, effort, opportunity, missed opportunity, initiative, prioritization, responsiveness, results, service, and speed have not been equally and mutually understood by speaker and receiver. And what is the source of the administrator-employee-volunteer misunderstanding or defiance? True north is corrupted. Why? Because each employee or volunteer approaches the above word definitions with reference to their job performance from different points on the broken PMO culture compass, instead of the same correct, true north starting point as so clearly supported by the PMO-related enhanced language in the parish mission statement. Therefore, the outcome will be the PMO administrator, employee, and volunteer must necessarily misunderstand each other when using the very same vocabulary. There can be no other outcome but miscommunication between speaker and receiver. Definitions of commonly used words suddenly become relative to an unknown standard, which is to say the standard carried privately in each person's mind. And why does this disconnect occur? Because in a broken culture, each person is unleashed to ascribe completely different definitions, actions, and levels of expected performance to the same job performance words. Why? Because the well-oiled culture that you as the PMO administrator hold in your head does not align with the culture they in reality are currently working under that the employee or volunteer holds in their head. This condition leads us to exposing the above-mentioned grand illusion, which is, in a broken culture, all PMO employees and volunteers work under the grand illusion they are achieving superior daily results because the untrained PMO administrator actively or passively encourages them to work under the influence of a culture that deceives them, a corrupted culture that not only gives false praise and tacit endorsement to mediocrity or worse performance, but also never demonstrates what in fact does constitute superior performance. Why? Because you cannot give in job performance what you do not define and steer into existence through the correct results-oriented culture. Thus, the grand illusion is a belief that all is well in PMO when all is not close to being well in PMO. While an examination and living color visualization of the actual employee results versus expected employee results gap might induce some laughter in a television sitcom plot, here you can channel the image of Lucy on the candy packing assembly line, if you've ever seen that video. Living this image is disastrous in terms of an administrator or leader training and managing those who report to them. As a further example, in a parallel manner, notice how it is equally laughable that automotive companies rely on customer service and consumer service feedback to inform them about the quality of their cars that have already rolled off their factory assembly lines and have been sold to the customer. And once mighty automotive companies wonder how or why they went bankrupt. Yes, they went bankrupt. Why? Because they produced a mediocre product, yet upper management convinced themselves they were delivering a superior product. And predictably, what happened next? The marketplace spoke. Buyers voted with their wallets and spent their money where truth was sold, not false promises. It is also laughable when a restaurant teaches their waitstaff to ask customers how their food tastes while the customer is already in the process of chewing it. And the restaurateur then wonders why there are no repeat customers in their second year of business. Could it be they served slop and expected the customer to tell them this was so, instead of them knowing it was so by their own honest self-measurement yardsticks that are the epitome of building the correct culture? Here is a quote from Ayn Rand. We can ignore reality, but we cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. End quote. If you are starting to sense here that proactively addressing a broken culture is paramount, but very hard work, you are on the correct thinking path. So where is the bottleneck in addressing all things culture? For most PMO administrators and wannabe leaders, it is found in another dreaded C word, confrontation. Chapter 26, The Attitude of the Receiver. We start by acknowledging that no rational person enjoys confrontation, but anticipating the inevitable personal heartburn and discomfort derived from confrontation cannot be used as an excuse to ignore our duty as administrators or leaders. It is for this very reason, avoidance of potential confrontation, organizational culture is often allowed to remain broken in perpetuity. Initially, addressing a broken culture is face-to-face work. It is not phone work and not email work and clearly not, "I'll let the next person deal with this" work. However, candid job performance conversations may, but not necessarily will, become confrontational. You can expect such conversations sometimes will turn confrontational, or at least be emotionally trying, due to the above comments regarding reluctance to acceptance of change, as well as the employee deducting the real risk of impending jeopardy to their ongoing employment. In other words, they might get fired. However, all things being equal, note that the reason why addressing a broken culture can become confrontational usually has little to nothing to do with the administrator, who is simply acting as the messenger of news that should have been delivered a long time ago by his or her predecessors. The messenger is blameless, provided he or she speaks with a charitable and understanding heart. If there is to be any confrontation over culture replacement, it most often stems from the stubborn minds of the receivers, who do not want to finally hear what they must hear, the truth about their job performance. Thus it becomes a fair question to resolve. Precisely what is the mental state of the receiver of the first fully and honest, candid job performance review when viewed through the lens of a new and correct culture? We can only speak here in general terms, but generally speaking, when an employee or volunteer has been led to believe by a prior boss, either overtly or via years of passive acceptance and silence, that the quality of his or her work has at least been acceptable, if not been incorrectly labeled as exemplary, how do you expect such a person to receive the news that his or her PMO work product is not what you, the new guy, want? Do you think this person will be filled with joy hearing this news? Or is it more likely there will be initial confusion caused by your remarks because your remarks, although 100% accurate and necessary, do not correlate and reconcile with what the employee or volunteer has been previously told for months or years? Is it more likely or not, no matter how calmly and Christ-like you present the truth, that this person might ultimately transit from an initial state of confusion, eventually to anger and confrontation? Now, do you start to feel the temptation rise here for the current PMO administrator to ignore the culture problem, avoiding potential if not likely confrontation, and just pass the buck to the next administrator? Perhaps now you see it as more likely than not you will inherit broken PMO. It is far easier to pass the buck and dodge potential confrontation than it is to deal with it. Well, too late now. You have been informed that option is not really an option at all for you. It is the sin of omission. Therefore, be prepared for anger. And let's be honest. Why shouldn't the misled employee or volunteer be angry? The PMO or volunteer did absolutely nothing wrong. It is the prior administrators who permitted the person to habitually operate within a broken culture, a culture that not only enshrined and reinforced mediocrity as the acceptable performance standard, but elevated mediocrity from what it truly is, unacceptable, to a higher label of performance than it ever deserved. This broken culture hid the truth of valid job performance measurements and performance reviews from everyone, including the people actually doing the work, who must now face reality for the first time in perhaps years of employment or volunteering. How in the world can the employee or volunteer initially be anything less than confused, and most likely angry, over being told his or her work product is not what you want, when up to that moment it had been declared, albeit incorrectly, as at least adequate, if not exemplary job performance. Thus, employees and volunteers may perpetuate the broken culture, but the seeds of a broken culture are initially sown by management, either by commission, in other words, proactive ignorance, or omission, which would be inaction, and subsequently watered by each management regime. Therefore, do not upon your arrival blame the employee or volunteer for any mediocrity you observed. What's done is done. Look in the mirror instead, because it's now on you to remedy. Chapter 27. Breaking the Chain of Broken Culture. Part of your job as an administrator or leader is to choose to break this chain of passing the buck of a broken culture from one administration to the next, or not. It's your call. Admittedly, the hard and narrow road is to displace the broken culture you inherit with the correct culture, but the much wider and easier road is to simply accept what you receive as you receive it, operate within it, ignore creating a new mission statement that publicly commits to providing superior PMO, and pass nothing better on to the person who ultimately replaces you. The former choice is to be our path. The latter choice is simply sin masquerading behind an invalid rationalization that things are just fine. As Jesus teaches through the parable of the bags of gold in Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30, the more knowledge you have, the more bags of gold you have been given, and the more responsibility you must bear. All personnel come to know to what degree of excellence management expects in the quality of their work, or lack thereof, to remain employed. How do they know? Via the correct culture that exists where they work. Viewed from another perspective, in the culture that exists where you work, how little does the employee or volunteer have to do to meet the currently enshrined standard of superior job performance? Rest assured, employees know their answer. The answer to this question is animated by the organizational culture that is in place. That you might like to believe that those working in some capacity for the church, or any organization really, would be immune to such a weak formulation of attitude, is to not only to deny the fundamental nature and attitude of the historically and previously poor managed employee, it is to deny the influence of the existing workplace culture on everyone. There is no magic, no intrinsic inoculation to displacing general human nature simply because the church is the employer instead of the secular world. Working or volunteering for the church does not supersede human nature. Over time, the most outstanding PMO employees or volunteers will out of frustration either quit and move on to work under a more results-oriented employment yardstick, in which case you have just lost their talents in your organization, or they will sadly succumb to the departmental drumbeat of mediocre job performance as exhibited by their peers, endorsed by their management through their silent acceptance, and as demanded by the existing culture flowing through the veins of their workplace. In the fight between broken culture versus typical employee, bet on broken culture, because broken culture usually wins. A broken culture gradually just beats people down, and the people who choose to stay in such a culture willingly accept mediocrity or worse as their performance yardstick without even realizing it. Again, channel here the story of the boiling frog. So, will you embrace proactive daily management of everyone who reports to you, which does not necessarily imply a large investment of your time, but simply the correct and effective way to spend your time? Or will you defer to some other flawed notions of management? Will you embrace flawed PMO management practices found in other parishes? Furthermore, will prospective new hire employees and volunteers, obviously before a job offer is made during their interview process, be read into your PMO culture, the only culture the applicant will ever know, a results-oriented culture where it is made crystal clear before accepting a job offer that at this institution of parishioner service, the tail of mediocrity does not wag this administrative dog. More on this point in the chapters on hiring and firing. But note the good news. There is no need to gang press everyone into achieving superior performance when the invisible hand of a correct culture inculcates within everyone their free will desire to perform in a superior manner, just as matter-of-factly as breathing. Note this point clearly. Once you have installed the correct culture, most people will naturally desire to conform to it. Why? Because that's just how we do things here. This is a beautiful thing to behold, but it doesn't happen by accident. You have to build it.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.